Lord, I pray that you will help our ears be open to what I'm about to read. Genesis 1:1-10. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without shape and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the watery deep. But the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light was good. So God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, marking the first day. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. It was so. God called the expanse sky. There was evening and there was morning, a second day. God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. God saw that it was good.
Hello everyone, how are we? That's good. I'm Denise, I'm the pastor here. If you don't know me, I'd love to meet you over a cuppa out in the courtyard. Thanks Jenny for reading that passage. It's an interesting one, isn't it? We did an end-of-year survey at the end of last year. We asked people what sermon topics would be helpful for you. We are going through this thing called a big year, where we're looking at teachings of Jesus, one different teaching each month, but we've got little spaces here and there to do other things. And there was more than one person who wanted some more sermons on Genesis. Let's unpack Genesis a little bit more. And so I had a spare week, and so that's what we're doing tonight. So I've called this Behind Genesis. And that's because if you've been here a long time, maybe you've seen this picture before. We've got these three different things, and you can call them three different worlds of the text, or you can call them three different ways of reading the text, reading the Bible. There's three. One is called the world behind the text, or you can read behind the text. And the idea of that is that everything that's written, your vacuum cleaner manual, or your Bible, is anchored in a time and a place. It was written in a time and a place, and it's going to reflect the culture, the language, the worldview of that time and place. And so the more you know about that time and place, the richer your reading of a text becomes, whether that's a fairy story or Genesis 1. There's also the world in the text, or you can read in the text. That's simply the words on the page. They form sentences and paragraphs. In our reading tonight, there's some poetry happening, so it's kind of genre. Like if you read chapter 1 of Genesis, you can see there's repeated lines. There's this kind of flow about it that doesn't happen if you're reading a history book or a newspaper. So those are things about the world in the text. And then the world in front of the text, or you can read in front of the text, that's what happens between the words on the page and me. And here I live in the 21st century in Australia, I'm a particular demographic, and all of that affects the way that I understand the words on the page. What I understand from those words on the page might be different than what you understand, because you might be a different demographic, have a different worldview than I do. And of course, when we go right back to whenever it was that Genesis was written, we're talking about quite a different worldview. So we have to sort of take all three of those into account. Actually, of course, we don't have to, do we? We don't have to do anything. You can simply just read the text. You can read Genesis 1 and get all sorts of things out of it, all sorts of good things. But I thought it might be interesting to go a little bit behind the text of Genesis 1 today. I apologise if this feels a little bit like a university lecture. It'll appeal to some of you and perhaps not to others. So if it's not appealing to you, by all means, get Candy Crush out and go for your lives. Back in 1847, Shane's gone. Back in 1847, that's a long time ago, but I guess not too long ago, there was this British archaeologist. His name was Austin Henry Layard. He was on a dig in northern Iraq. Being an archaeologist, he made a discovery that changed our understanding of the book of Genesis. He discovered things that looked like this. These are cuneiform tablets. They're small clay tablets. They're about 5 by 7 inches. And they had some of the earliest forms of writing known on these tablets. In the years following, thousands of these things were uncovered in this place. They were compiled, the broken pieces were put back together as well as possible, and they were translated. Henry Layard had discovered an ancient Assyrian library. Probably this library was there at least from the 7th century BCE. So we're talking 600 to 700 years before Christ. That's a long time ago. Many of the tablets, though, were much, much older than that. So they had been collected and then put together in this library. Among the writings were things like there were legal documents about land purchases, there were long accounts of battles, there were divorce certificates, there were detailed descriptions of spells and what to use those spells for, and there was an account of a flood. It was a devastating flood sent by God to wipe out all humanity. And it's a story about a man who's instructed to build a giant boat and seal it with pitch to make it waterproof so that he and his family could escape this terrible flood. The boat would be filled with animals so that the animals wouldn't all be wiped out in the flood. And as the flood covers the earth, birds are released to see if the water has started to subside. Eventually, the boat comes to rest on a mountain, and the inhabitants of the boat are saved. After this terrible ordeal, this man who built the boat, the hero of the story, offers sacrifices to God, and he and his wife are granted divine immortality. The hero of the story is a man named Utnapishtim. And the story of the flood is one part of a much larger narrative known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Has anyone heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh? Yeah, some people have. In the years since Layard's discovery, other copies of the same story, with a few details different, but many other copies of that same story have been found, and copies in different languages, in different places, dated to different times. Some have been dated back to 2000 BCE. Of course, dating is not an exact science. And of course, some details are different. Sometimes the names are different, but it's kind of the same story. It seems like the Epic of Gilgamesh was a very well-known story in ancient Near East cultures, like the ancient Assyria and ancient Babylon. It also seems that this ancient epic poem predates the Genesis account of Noah and the flood, if that's, I'm sure that many of you recognised the details of that story as quite similar. Predated that story by at least hundreds of years. And yet, the parallels are remarkable. There's almost certainly some connection between the two stories. What's going on? As well as stories about a flood, and a hero building a boat to save his family, other ancient stories emerged from this site of Layard's discovery and in other archaeological discoveries since. One of those stories is called Enuma Elish, also known as the 7 Tablets of Creation. It's a story about Marduk, the god that the Babylonians worshipped, that they worshipped as the top of their god hierarchy because they worshipped lots of different gods. And this story explains how Marduk became such an important god. And why he is worthy of their worship. This story is about his victory over the forces of chaos. Sarah, you've got to see her t-shirt tonight, just saying. She's the chaos coordinator. So the story is about Marduk's victory over the forces of chaos and of his establishment of order over the creation of the world. In the beginning, in Marduk's story, there was water, no sky, no land, just water. 2 sorts of water though, and they were kind of like gods, but they were also just water. There was a male, Apsu, fresh water, and a female named Tiamat, salt water. These 2 water gods mingled together, and their union produced younger gods. All was well until these gods, hit their teenage years or something. They grew a little bit wild. They had very rowdy gatherings. Poor Apsu couldn't stand the noise, and so he planned to kill all of the young gods. Fairly dramatic response. Tiamat, however, wanted to protect her children, and so she warned her eldest son, Enki, of Apsu's plan. Unfortunately, Enki took matters into his own hands. He put Apsu to sleep and then killed him. Well, Tiamat's horrified now. That's not how she saw things going forward, and she is enraged now at her eldest son that he has killed her mate. So she summons the forces of chaos and creates an army of monsters to kill all of her children. These gods are fickle and capricious. The younger gods try to fight against Mum, but they fail at every turn. Eventually, one of the younger gods, Marduk, steps up. He comes armed with a net, an arrow, and the 4 mighty winds. He ensnares Tiamat in this net and draws her in close to him. She's so enraged, she opens her mouth as wide as she can because she's going to swallow Marduk. But this is exactly what he's planned. He takes the opportunity to command the wind that he's brought with him to rush into her mouth and fill up her whole belly. And so she puffs up. Tiamat looks a little bit like a serpent or a kind of dragon shape in a lot of ancient pictures. Once she's puffed up, Marduk pierces her heart with his arrow and she dies. Then Marduk uses his arrow to slice her body in half from top to bottom. And so there she lays, this water god, dead and sliced in two flat and wide halves. Marduk uses her body to create and separate the earth, the land, and the heavens, the sky. So he takes one half of her body and he pushes it upwards to create the sky dome, a firmament, an expanse. This keeps her water, remember she's a water god, keeps her water safely above the dome so that it doesn't come crashing down to flood the earth. Remember this ancient story came from an area where there were yearly floods. Rivers go up, rivers go down, there's always devastating floods. So he sets heavenly bodies now. Once that expanse is up there holding back the waters, he sets heavenly bodies in place on that dome. Star gods, planet gods, a moon god. The other half of her body, Marduk is standing on. He even smashes her skull. I read the text, as much of it as there is. There's like little gaps every now and again. It is so violent. This is not PG even, I don't think. Anyway, he's standing on the other half of her body, and it becomes the earth, the dry land. And remember, she's a water god, so there's water under the dry land. So the dry land is floating on this Tiamat's waters below. Marduk's final act of creation is to create humans, because he thinks there's still a lot of gods, and there's lower gods and higher gods, and the lower gods are getting a bit sick of having to do all the labour for the higher gods. So let's create something else, some other beings. Let's create some humans. He sacrifices one of his fellow gods, slits their throat, and he mixes the god's blood with the dirt. And out of that, he forms people. These people are formed to serve the gods, to prepare food for the gods and offer that food, to build shrines for them. This is what they are created for. It's interesting, isn't it? This is part of what's going on behind the Genesis text. Because I think we can see that someone want to just tap Robin. Yeah, he's had a hard day. He told me about it, and he's been busy today. Genesis 1 and the flood story in Genesis 6, it has very obvious connections to these ancient creation stories, right? And if you've never heard these ancient origin stories, the similarities between them and the origin story that we've embraced as part of our faith, as part of our Christian faith, those similarities could make us feel very unsettled. If you grew up being taught that Genesis 1 gives a factual, scientific or historical account of how the universe came to be, then the discovery of other ancient stories that also tell that story in similar and yet different ways, or at least parallel ways, can come as a bit of a shock, I think, can unsettle us. So why am I bringing this stuff to your attention? My point is that the Genesis account was not written in a vacuum. It was influenced by the culture of the surrounding cultures. But while the similarities might come as a shock, the similarities could make us feel a little bit unsettled, the gold is in the differences, the different details, because it's the differences that suggest that the Genesis stories were written, at least in part, in resistance to those other such well-known stories that served as propaganda for the kings and the powerful people of those other cultures. It's the differences between the stories that show us how our scriptures portray our God, in contrast with how these other ancient civilizations saw their gods. It's the differences that show how our scriptures portray humans and humanity, in contrast with how these other ancient civilizations saw people. The Babylonian gods, and Marduk in particular, powerful, violent, scary, and humans are created to serve him. You'd better not cross Marduk. How do you interact with this God to keep him happy? That's what you really need to know. Well, you do it through the representatives of that God, And who represents God? Well, the human Babylonian king. That's Marduk's representative on earth, the representative who rules the nation on Marduk's behalf. So you'd better not cross the king, had you? Bad things will happen. If you disobey the king, then you're disobeying Marduk. Dissing the king is blasphemy to Marduk. An uprising against the king is a challenge to Marduk, and he will surely quell such sedition, probably through the king and the king's armies. Service to the king is service to Marduk. It's an excellent way to keep a people under submission and in control, isn't it? The Hebrew creation story that we find in Genesis 1, it is quite a different story. We heard half of it read tonight. It's a story that shows the creation of the cosmos out of chaos too. To start with, there was just the watery deep, chaotic, dark, no light. But the chaos of the watery deep doesn't get overcome through the violence of the gods, through the superior warfare of one god over the other. Instead, it's a chaos that's tamed by just one God and through the words simply spoken by that one God. God speaks and things are created. God speaks and the cosmos is formed into seas and skies and land. God speaks and that sea, that sky, that land is suddenly filled, teeming with life. And humans? What are humans in this story? They're not created through the blood of a god who had his throat slit to be servants of all the gods, to be slaves, to bring them food, to build their temples. Rather, humans are created as the jewel, the final, the climax to this creation story. God looks at all he's created and he saw that it was good. This phrase gets repeated over and over again. And God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good. And after God creates people, he looked at what he'd created and he saw that it was very good. That's how our God sees humans. The Genesis story also kind of democratises humanity. No longer is it this one king who acts as God's representative on earth, the one king who speaks on behalf of God and everybody else has to listen, who rules with the authority of a God, that everybody else has to obey to keep the wrath of God away. All people, all human beings are created in the image of God in this creation story, in our creation story. All are created in the image of God. Think about that. All are created in the image of God. All are of equal worth. All are of equal value. No person, no one person speaks on behalf of God and everyone else has to listen. All voices are going to have something to say because all have been created in the image of God. And that means all share in the responsibility of stewarding this creation, this cosmos, of partnering with God to keep this planet very good. No one person holds a higher intrinsic authority than any other. Sure, some people have different positions in government jobs or in corporations. Some hold positions of more influence than others. Different people have different talents and gifts that are used in different ways. But regardless of their position, regardless of the authority that's given to them in their position, regardless of their intelligence, regardless of their attractiveness, their strength, their wealth, their ability to wield a sword. No human being is worth more or less than any other human being. And all humans have access to God, not just the ones who hold the top religious positions, the representatives of God. That means there should be no, well, God told me that this is what you should do. It's a very subversive message, Genesis 1, a very subversive message. Even more subversive, I'd suggest, back in the day when it was penned, when these thoughts were gathered together. Kings have no special power under God. Kings have no special power under heaven. All humans are equal. So when we read these origin stories of our faith, Genesis from 1 all the way to chapter 11 kind of fall into this category. We read those stories of our faith in conversation with other origin stories of the surrounding cultures, and actually it really enriches our reading. It doesn't diminish or take away from our faith. Do you need to know all of this stuff to get something out of your reading of Genesis? Of course not. Genesis 1, it's a beautiful piece of writing. It's beautiful literature. It has a beautiful message. Whether you know what was going on behind the scenes or not, it doesn't really matter. You take something away. But knowing just a little bit more from behind the text with some of this stuff that I've brought today, don't let it shake you. Don't let it unsettle you, because it can only benefit us, even though sometimes it can feel unsettling. Thank you to whoever it was who wanted more stories, wanted more stuff on the topic of Genesis, because I love this.